So I look at people that critique as weak. Weak rhymes with critique. So, if you're going to critique like, hey, this is never going to work or whatever, then I just say, you know what, let's see you try it, and then we'll see how you do.
A lot of movie critics don't really understand movies. Okay, so allow me to explain my position here. First of all, hi, my name's Neo, and I'm a filmmaker. Ever since I was a kid, movies have always been a big part of my life, and I don't think that's gonna change anytime soon. Ever since I started taking filmmaking more seriously, I noticed one thing. When you start to learn more about the creative process behind something like filmmaking, you start to gain respect for directors that you used to think were not that great. For example, Michael Bay. Now, Michael Bay is a director that's been criticized by pretty much every person with an internet connection. He's been criticized for focusing too much on CGI and not on practical effects. He's been criticized for having too much product placement in his movies, and he's been criticized for hiring mediocre actors in a lot of his movies, as well as a slew of other things. However, what a lot of people fail to realize is that directors producing bad or mediocre films do not equate to them being a bad or mediocre director. As a matter of fact, I would argue that a lot of the things that people would call flaws in his films aren't flaws at all. People say Michael Bay uses CGI too much and not enough practical effects, yet they don't seem to understand that practical effects are expensive. Just because a film has a lot of CGI and not very many practical effects, that doesn't mean that the filmmakers are lazy. It's easy to accuse Hollywood directors of being lazy when you don't know what percentage of the budget actually went towards visual effects. You see, no one ever thinks that maybe this movie didn't have the budget to do practical effects. Believe it or not, films have budgets, and a certain percentage of that budget has to go towards things like feeding your cast and crew, hair and makeup, set design, insuring all of the gear that's being used on set, and a fuckload of other boring stuff that people don't like to talk about. You see, in Hollywood, a lot of your success is measured by your ability to turn a profit. I don't make the rules, I'm just telling you how it is. And Michael Bay knows how to turn a profit, and so he gets work. Meanwhile, another director can make an amazing film full of practical effects and amazing performances from A-list actors, but if the film costs too much money to make and it doesn't gross that much, then the director isn't gonna make it very far in the industry. Again, I don't make the rules. So yes, sometimes directors have to cut corners. Sometimes they have to hire the actors that they can afford rather than the actors that they would actually like. And sometimes product placement is the only thing that's gonna get you your money back. When I made my first few short films and I think about how difficult it was to fund them and how unsuccessful we were in actually earning any of that money back, I realized that sometimes you have to go with what you can actually afford rather than what you would actually want to do. And I'm pretty sure the same rules apply when it comes to big budget filmmaking. I bring this up because I feel like a lot of movie critics here on YouTube like to go after films as a whole without taking into account a lot of the different factors that go into making a film, the biggest one being the budget. You see, the problem with trying to create an objective standard for film and film criticism is that everything is relative. If you make a movie for just $1, then it's probably gonna be a really shitty movie, but it's probably the best film that you could possibly make for just $1. My point is that I believe film critics should be more attentive to things like budget and a lot of the other steps in the filmmaking process before they just start slamming all of these movies. The thing that critics fail to realize is that mediocre films are pretty much just as hard to make as great films. It's easy for a critic to say that these films are shit when most critics themselves have no idea what goes into making a film of any kind. Let's have a look at some of the biggest contributors to this problem, shall we? Your Movie Sucks, also known as YMS, or simply Adam, a guy that's often praised amongst the movie reviewing community for his comedic cynicism in his videos, but also someone that obviously isn't that great at actually criticizing the production quality of most movies, considering the fact that he described Precious, a critically acclaimed film that currently sits at 91% on Rotten Tomatoes, as being sloppy. He also said that Nymphomaniac, a film that currently sits at 72% on Rotten Tomatoes, is, quote, a giant steaming pile of shit that is not worth the price of admission. Now, him not liking these movies isn't a problem. That's his opinion and he's entitled to it. However, the reasons that he provides as to why he doesn't like these movies aren't really all that good. Rather than critiquing the overall story of either of these films, he just points out a few key scenes that he takes issue with and then acts like they ruin the whole movie. Like when he said the editing in Precious was sloppy because it had one scene that had a cut that he thought seemed out of place.
She then sits on a bench for a few seconds after eating the whole bucket of fried chicken. Then there's an obvious cut as she's, jumping off of the bench to throw up in a garbage can or whatever. And by obvious cut, I mean from the same angle.
Or how he shit on Nymphomaniac because he didn't like how the aspect ratio changed throughout the film.
By this point, you're probably wondering why the aspect ratio is different. Well, your guess is as good as mine, but I'm sure it has some significance, right?
And he also didn't like this one scene where they made a mistake with the audio.
Wow, that scream sounded great. Let's copy and paste it to 10 seconds later in the same scene.
Now, regardless of what your opinions on these films are, I feel like we should acknowledge that what Adam is doing here isn't criticism. This is just nitpicking. The one thing that you hear movie critics saying over and over again is that the story is the most important part of a movie. And yet here you have Adam critiquing every part of the movie except for the story, and then acting as if those criticisms are enough to warrant the film having a bad rating. Sure, while Precious may have some questionable editing choices, is it really a bad movie? Was it really deserving of a "your movie sucks" video? The story is still fantastic, and the lead actresses give great performances throughout the entire film, and yet you're deducting points from this movie because one of the extras was really inconsistent with her fake accent.
And one of them would switch back and forth between very thick accent to not much of an accent at all.
And you say that the only reason why people enjoyed the movie is because they feel like they have to?
It seems as if most people like this film because they think they're supposed to. I don't know, like...
Adam, this movie has 6 Academy Award nominations. Critics praise this movie to no end, and majority opinion goes against you here. So I'm not acting out of line when I ask you, is the only reason why you didn't like this movie is because you feel like you weren't allowed to? Because cynicism is a key element of your channel? I already mentioned how your problems with the movie Nymphomaniac pretty much only amount to minor nitpicks, and yet you still say that it's a giant steaming pile of shit and it isn't worth the price of admission? Does that really seem like a fair response to you? I mean, there were actually a lot of people that really liked this movie, and for good reason. The acting in it is pretty good with the exception of Shia LaBeouf. The cinematography is nice with the exception of all the different changes in aspect ratio and filming style. And the story, while being a bit long and over-dramatized, is really interesting and easy to follow. My biggest complaint is that the poor pacing and the drawn-out editing in this movie makes it hard to realistically sit through all the way. But I'd still say that the movie is at least a 6 out of 10. Your summary of giant piece of shit, however, is not only needlessly cynical, but it also creates a feedback loop of negativity since people who really like the movie are now insulted that you basically just told them that the movie was a waste of their money. But now you've also given ammunition to the people that didn't like the movie to use to go after the people that did. This creates a really shitty and negative message that generates supporters who thrive on the negativity of hating a movie rather than the positivity of enjoying one. I feel like Adam and most of his followers get more enjoyment out of shitting on a movie that they really hate than they do from watching a movie that they really enjoy. And thus is the branding of YMS, a channel built up on the negativity and cynicism of a sassy know-it-all rather than a channel built up on actual proper film criticism. Take away Adam's snarky and sarcastic delivery from YMS and what do you have? In all actuality, not that much. Cynicism is basically what drives his entire channel, and without his comedic cynicism, his movie reviews wouldn't really hold that much weight considering his own lack of knowledge in how films are actually made.
Also, this entire scene's noticeably dubbed.
In this scene, it seems like Adam is criticizing the dubbing for not exactly lining up with the actor's movements, but what I think he fails to understand is that the goal of ADR, or automated dialogue replacement, isn't just to sync up with the original audio, it's to produce better audio than what was originally recorded. Maybe the ADR doesn't line up because the dialogue wasn't correct in the original recording. Now you might be thinking, well, they should have just reshot it, but keep in mind that reshoots are incredibly expensive, time consuming, and sometimes your actors, boom operators, and cinematographers just aren't available for reshoots. With this minor sync issue aside, the rest of the ADR throughout the film is actually pretty good, but Adam's lack of understanding on the process that goes behind ADR leaves him critiquing what he thinks is bad ADR, but let an actual sound engineer listen to this and they'll most likely tell you that they actually did a pretty good job on this scene. So if you're going to attack the ADR, then at least take the whole process into consideration. If you don't understand that process holistically, then just don't critique it. Not only that, but why are you even discussing the production of the film? I mean, a movie critic's overall job is to be the voice of the general public and to express the thoughts and ideas of your average moviegoer in a way that they aren't able to do themselves. With that said, aren't critics usually supposed to just critique things like story and acting since those are the things that the general public are gonna notice? Do you really ever see people exiting a theater talking about the cinematography or the sound design? I mean, if he was giving good production advice, then it wouldn't be a problem, but Adam doesn't know anything about film production. He's never worked in film, so why would we expect him to know how to critique a film's production? It's important to have a good understanding of the fundamentals in order to identify bad technique. If you don't understand those fundamentals, why are you criticizing the technique? This would be like somebody that eats fast food all day walking into a 5-star restaurant and then saying that the chef is bad at his job because his food doesn't taste as good as Burger King. It's okay to say that you didn't like something, but it's important to understand that saying that you didn't like something isn't the same as critiquing it, because actual critique requires a level of understanding of what it is you're actually criticizing. And this is where Adam completely misses the mark strictly for the sake of cynicism, i.e., pointing his bony finger at every little movie mistake and then acting as if those mistakes justify him giving the film a 1 out of 10. It's unfair to critique something that you don't really understand holistically, especially if it's something as complex and involved as filmmaking. This is why most professional critics in the past never really tried to critique production techniques. People like Siskel and Ebert had common enough sense to know that they were unqualified to critique that aspect of filmmaking, so they mostly only talked about the story and what the movie was like as a whole. Which is how movies should be reviewed anyways, because critiquing production is really unfair since movies with more money would almost always have the advantage. A movie with a budget of 20 million might have the budget to get better dubbing, but a movie with a budget of 10 million might not. So does the movie with a smaller budget get shamed for having bad dubbing? Does a student film that was made with $30 get shamed because it doesn't have the same production quality as a film made with $30 million? Gee, it's almost as if every film is made differently, and so having a standard by which you review their production quality is really pointless and ineffective. Hopefully you'll realize this soon enough, since in your video you mentioned that you recently bought a GH5 and that you plan on using it to shoot a music video.
As some of you already know, I'm in the middle of recording a feature-length album for my music, and I've already started filming at least one music video with this camera, so I'm very excited to share that all with you when the album's out.
Maybe as you get more involved in the filmmaking process, you'll be humbled and that'll inspire you to change your reviewing style. Probably not though, since cynicism is basically part of your brand at this point. But hopefully you'll at least be able to produce something fairly decent. After all, it would be really embarrassing if after complaining about films with mediocre production for so long, you yourself released a video with mediocre production. Kind of like how Chris Stuckman released a film with mediocre production when he made his directorial debut in Auditorium 6. Needless to say, it wasn't all that great. As we can see from the trailer, there are a few things about this film that really scream unprofessional, like the acting, which really isn't that good.
There is something very wrong in Auditorium 6.
Even the people in the comment section are going on about how bad the acting is.
Something about this just seems off.
The budget? I think it's the bad acting. Yeah, the acting is trash, but it seems interesting apart from that. Yeah, it's the bad acting. Mostly the lead. He's horrible. Not only is the delivery stilted, but the flow and pacing is all off. Notice how he just randomly yells, "No way," after the manager tells him his speech. It feels rehearsed and unnatural, like someone having earbuds in and yelling, interrupting a conversation. There's no flow. Apparently this short film had a budget of $17,000, which really isn't that much money to make a film with at all, but they shot the whole thing on a red weapon as seen here in this behind the scenes photo. The cinematography was done by a guy named Greg Krause, a cinematographer with over 15 years of experience. On his website, he has a list of all the gear that he has available for shoots, and believe me, it's quite an impressive list of camera, lighting, and audio equipment. So it's fair to say that most of the gear used on the set of this movie was provided by Greg Krause rather than being rented from another production warehouse. Now, hiring a cinematographer like that would surely cost a lot of money and take up a considerable portion of the film's budget, which leads me to believe that they probably spent more money on trying to make the film look cinematic rather than just hiring good actors. As someone that dreams to one day become a filmmaker, you would think that Chris Stuckman would know that having good acting is more important than having good cinematography. I mean, they could have just shot the whole thing on a cheap camera like the Canon 7D. which has actually been used on quite a few actual movie sets as a B camera. Then he could have used the extra money to hire better actors and a really good grip for the lighting. You see, the reason why there are actual big budget films that still use these inexpensive DSLRs is because they have the lighting crew to make these cameras look just as cinematic as anything coming out of an ARRI or RED camera. With the right lighting, you can make any basic DSLR camera look good, so ideally when making movies, you should spend a good chunk of your visual budget on lighting and another good chunk on hiring good actors. But instead, Chris Stuckman decided to make the camera one of his biggest priorities, and he gave us a film that looks really good, but is really poorly acted. Now, granted, this is his first short film, and to his credit, he even won a few awards. But all the awards that it won come from film festivals that have websites that look like this, with this weird white square in the corner for some reason. And all the awards that Chris did win had titles like Special Mention and Best Director of Ohio. Cause there's just so many directors hanging out in Ohio. Must have been some pretty tough competition. In all seriousness, I'm sure he's only going to get better with time. I mean, my first short films didn't have amazing acting or win any fancy awards either. Then again, my first short film didn't have a budget of $17,000 either, so, you know, whatever. But hopefully he learned a lot while making this movie, and maybe it even changed his perspective when it comes to reviewing movies, and maybe he won't be so quick to give an F to so many movies that are, in all actuality, perfectly fine films. A lot of movie critics here on YouTube are so quick to call a movie shit, or garbage, or the worst movie ever, when in reality, I don't think that even half of them even know what a bad movie really looks like. Now, as a filmmaker, I frequently attend a lot of different film festivals in my local area, and I can tell you that if you're someone that thinks that something like Transformers is a bad movie, then try sitting through 10 short films made by some 13-year-old kid with a cheap DSLR and a Rode video mic. A lot of local film festivals have entire screening blocks dedicated to first-time directors, and I can tell you that after seeing any of these god-awful short films, you'll be looking at Transformers like it's Citizen fucking Kane. When you compare most big-budget Hollywood productions to the kind of shit that you would see at your average film festival, you'll quickly find out that most movies that come out in theaters are just average. But average isn't marketable to film critics, so what you often get is a lot of people pretending as if every bad movie that comes out is complete and total garbage, and every good movie that comes out is just okay. Like it or not, cynicism sells. My main issue with this is that these critics are so popular that it has an impact on the general audience and how they view movies. People are often hesitant to actually give a movie a good review because being cynical and spiteful towards 90% of movies is now the norm. And this makes it hard for people to truly see the actual good qualities in films. People absolutely hated Suicide Squad, and pretty much every bad thing about the film has already been talked about a million times, but no one ever talks about the good aspects. The costume design, the color grading, the cinematography, all of these were perfectly fine, and they were just as important to the production as everything else, so why are people only talking about the negative aspects? Same thing with something like the Emoji Movie. While it definitely has a mediocre story, at least the animation is nice. At least it actually feels like a movie. Say what you want about films like Transformers, but at least they aren't this. What's wrong, babe? You look sad.
Babe, I have to tell you something.
What is it, hon?
I'm pregnant.
Getting your film distributed is an incredibly difficult process, which is why if your film actually does make it to theaters, then chances are you did something right. This is why I personally am not comfortable with giving most big budget Hollywood productions anything less than a 5 out of 10. I feel like your film has to be at least a 5 out of 10 before anyone would even consider distributing it. Which is why I think a lot of critics here on YouTube don't understand what a bad movie really looks like, considering the fact that I see tons of these movie critics giving films like 50 Shades of Grey a 2 out of 10.
If you have a shitty author take inspiration from another shitty author, it doesn't make a positive movie, it doesn't make a good movie, it just makes shit. It's shit inspired by shit, which creates more shit. It's all negative.
Hey, could you shut the fuck up? This is Jeremy Johns. He's basically Chris Stuckman with even less talent. Say what you want about YMS, at least his videos actually feel like reviews. They're long, detailed, and they're actually pretty funny sometimes. But Jeremy's videos, I'm not even sure if I want to call them reviews. They're really more just like short synopses. I mean, almost all of them are around 5 minutes long. They explain some of the basic points of the movie. He gives a brief yay or nay, and then that's it. He doesn't even give the film a final rating at the end. Like, come on, dude, if your reviews are gonna be that short, you should at least have some sort of rating system. Out of all the movie reviewers here on YouTube, Jeremy Jahns is probably the least knowledgeable. I honestly couldn't tell you who his reviews are made for, since they're not detailed enough to really give you any sort of idea of how good or bad the movie is or why. I mean, he talks like he literally just got back from seeing the movie and hasn't fully grasped everything that he just saw. So he just kind of gives you this overly enthusiastic briefing of the film. Sort of like having one friend that's just like, oh man, you gotta see this movie. It's so fucking good. There's like this good guy, and then there's like this fucking bad guy, and they're fucking duking it out. And then like the girl, she's like crying. She's like, oh my god, please save me. And then he fucking swoops in and snatches her up and saves her. Oh my god, you fucking gotta see it.
What the fuck?
Next up on our list, we have Ralph the Movie Maker. And as his name implies, he is, indeed, Ralph. And a movie maker. Unlike a lot of other movie reviewers, Ralph actually considers himself a filmmaker first and a critic second. And while that is a much better mentality to have, his body of content would lead you to believe otherwise. While Ralph will make the occasional short film, most of what he uploads is just reviews, which isn't really something that filmmakers do. I mean, typically you don't see too many filmmakers get popular by reviewing other people's films. Actually, I don't think that's ever happened. So if Ralph wants to make movies, why does he spend so much of his time making movie reviews? Well, recently he announced that he's actually going to be spending less time on his Ralph the Movie Maker series and more time actually making films, as well as focusing on some of his more production-heavy videos on his channel. Which is actually really good, because this not only gives him the opportunity to create a much better body of work, seeing as how his movie reviews can't really be used in any kind of professional portfolio, but it also helps him improve as a filmmaker through experience, and this will really help him improve some of the flaws in his current films, like the mediocre acting, and his insistence to always put himself in his own movies. Although this can pretty much be blamed on lack of money to afford better actors, meaning that Ralph is probably the best actor that he knows, or he just writes all of his scripts to be more suited to his personality, cadence, and behavior. So he can't see anyone else playing a role that was so clearly written for himself so that he can do his Quentin Tarantino impression.
If you were poor and black, I could probably shoot you right now and get away with it. There wouldn't even be a trial. I'd probably get a fucking medal.
There's also bad color grading that makes certain shots look way too stylized and not cinematic at all, and then makes other shots look really grainy and downright amateurish. I assume that it's because he's probably using LUTs to try to make his shots look more cinematic, but if you're just starting out with color grading, you really shouldn't be using LUTs because there's no way to really break the LUT down into different pieces and actually see what it's doing to your image. So you're not really learning all that much by using them. It's better to just color grade everything manually, since that's what's going to get you the best look for your film. Ralph's films also have bad audio due to his reliance on scratch audio, as well as his poor sound mixing skills.
Date, right?
Oh yeah, tonight's night.
Just be yourself, do what you gotta
I'm
do,
nervous.
you know?
Yeah,
You'll
I'm nervous,
be fine.
but I'm gonna get it done. Yes, because this totally sounds like we are actually outside and 15 feet away from the camera. There's no possible way that this could all just be really bad ADR that I'm listening to right now. When doing ADR, you should try your best to recreate the environment that all the footage was recorded in. If your characters are far away from the camera, then get far away from the mic. Don't talk into the mic like you normally would and then just put reverb on it. This scene takes place outside anyway, so there wouldn't even really be that much reverb since there aren't any walls for the sound to bounce off of. In this case, you would have to be recording all the ADR in a room that's properly acoustically treated so that it doesn't sound like you're just recording it in a room. When you get into post-production, add a little bit of delay and very, very, very little reverb. Too much and you'll ruin your sound. When doing ADR for a scene that takes place outside, compression and EQ will be your best friend. But don't fuck it up now, since adding too much in the low end will make your actor sound like they're right up against the mic, and too little low end will make their voice sound thin and unnatural. This is why having your actors the right distance from the mic is important, since it makes the gap between too much and too little a whole lot wider. This just goes to show you that being able to critique a movie and being able to make a movie are two completely different things. And if you're an aspiring filmmaker, then you should really understand that sitting around watching movies, critiquing movies, and watching other people critiquing movies isn't going to get you that far. You're better off just picking up a camera and making your own movie rather than sitting down and analyzing one. I could go on and on about all of the different movie reviewers here on YouTube that suffer from all of these same problems to varying degrees, but I'd mostly just be repeating myself. The bottom line is that a lot of them talk big game without having the knowledge to back it up. There's a huge disconnect between Hollywood filmmakers and the general public. Most people don't really understand what goes into making a movie, and a lot of these critics are no exception. Sure, there's a lot of them that would have you believe that they know what they're talking about when it comes to making movies, but I guarantee you that almost none of them could tell me what a tungsten to fluorescent correction gel does. Now, I'm not saying that you have to have filmmaking experience in order to give proper criticism of a movie, but if you don't know anything about film production, then just don't criticize it. Stick to criticizing the things that the general audience cares about, since that's what you should be doing anyway. As for anyone that actually hopes to be a filmmaker in the future, don't listen to these pseudo-intellectuals try to analyze films, because I guarantee you that you're not going to learn anything useful from watching their videos. Just because they know how to nitpick their way through a YouTube movie review, that doesn't mean that any of them could actually make a decent movie. And adopting their nitpicky mentality instead of focusing on the more important aspects of your films is just going to stunt your growth as a filmmaker. You're better off just watching the movies that these guys talk about and formulating your own opinions and learning what the things that you like in movies really are. What might seem like a bad film to these guys could very easily be your favorite film of all time. There's nothing wrong with subjective commentary. In fact, a large part of my channel is dedicated to exactly that. But these guys never present their reviews as if they're actually subjective. You'll constantly hear these movie reviewers say, "This movie is bad," rather than, "I don't like this movie." Believe it or not, there's a huge difference between those two statements. Hearing one of these movie critics say that a movie is somehow objectively bad is like hearing somebody that listens to rock music all the time say that rap is bad. If you're somebody that listens to rock music all the time and that's the only thing that you really have any knowledge and experience in, then the only valid criticism that you could apply to rap music would be that you don't like it rather than it's bad. When you put on this smart person persona and present your criticism as if you're pointing out objective flaws in the way that the film was made, it causes a lot of people to adopt the mentality that, oh, since X or Y smart internet reviewer doesn't like this movie, you and I shouldn't like it either. It's easy to make movie reviews. Grab a mic, learn Sony Vegas, and tell everyone your uninformed and predictable opinions on whatever the latest movie that everyone has decided is the new worst movie ever. But to make films, you need passion, and drive, and ambition. You have to learn the ins and outs of making a movie, and most of the time you're gonna have to work with a team of people in order to get it done. You have to put in a lot of work to be a filmmaker, and I've never seen any of these movie reviewers get a distribution deal by sitting around and talking about movies all day, and I don't think that I ever will. If you're a filmmaker, the worst thing that you can do is sit around thinking that you're gonna make it big by doing movie reviews and half-baked video essays. You're better off picking up a camera and making your own movie instead of trying to be like these assholes. Hopefully this video fully conveys why I don't agree with most internet movie reviewers without coming across as me just hating on them or attacking them for no reason. Inevitably, I'm going to have people that disagree with me, and that's completely fine. In fact, I actually encourage people to tell me why they disagree in the comments below. And maybe you can actually send this video to some internet movie reviewer that you think might want to see it. At least then that would give them the opportunity to speak out in defense of themselves. Or just completely ignore me, like everyone else does. My name is NeoJesus, and if you like what you see, consider subscribing. I'm always writing, shooting, and editing brand new videos all the time, so there's always something new to look forward to.